For more than 70 years, there's been this one incredibly powerful psychological method that has just dominated police interrogation rooms. It's been credited with solving thousands of crimes. But here's the thing. A growing number of critics say this exact same technique is basically a finely tuned machine for producing false confessions. So today, we're going to break down the Reid Technique. I mean, think about it for a second. It sounds like something out of a movie, right? But it's a very real question at the heart of this whole debate. Just imagine yourself in a small, windowless room, hours and hours into an intense interrogation. Do you think that kind of pressure could make you doubt your own memory? Could it, just break you down until you say what they want to hear? Now look at this number. Just let it sink in. More than a quarter, 1 in 4, of all the people who have been exonerated by DNA evidence had already confessed to the crime. And that single staggering fact forces you to ask a really tough question. How in the world were those confessions obtained? Okay, so to really get to the bottom of this, here's our plan. First, we'll get into what the Reid Technique actually is. Then we'll walk through exactly how it works, step by step. After that, we're going to dive into the huge debate surrounding it, and finally take a look at where interrogation might be headed next. So, first things first, what is this thing? Well, as the subtitle here says, its invention was a massive shift in how police do things, a move away from, beating confessions out of people, and toward using the power of the mind. To really get the technique, you have to understand what it replaced. At its core, the Reid Technique isn't just one long, intense questioning session. No, it's a whole system, a carefully designed 3-phase process that starts with a pretty casual interview and then, if needed, moves into a very focused, psychologically intense interrogation. And the whole point, the endgame, is to secure a confession. This whole technique was really born out of necessity. Back in the 1930s, the so-called third degree, which was often just straight-up violence, was pretty common. That is, until a major report came out and condemned it. Cops needed a new tool. So in the 50s, a former Chicago police officer named John Reid came up with one. He basically said, let's replace the rubber hose with psychological pressure. By 1962, his manual was out, and it got so big, so influential, that just a few years later, the Supreme Court's famous Miranda decision was created, in part to act as a safeguard against its powerful tactics. So, the big question, how does this method actually work in practice? Let's break down the process to see how it's designed to, piece by piece, dismantle a suspect's will to resist. It all starts way before anyone even sits down in the hot seat. First, investigators do a deep dive into the facts, and they're careful to hold back certain key details that only the guilty person would know. Then comes a friendly, non-accusatory interview, just to build a little rapport and see how the person acts normally. It's only after all that, if the investigator thinks the person is guilty, that we get to the third and most famous stage, the interrogation. Now, the interrogation itself is this highly structured, 9-step psychological maze. It kicks off with what's called the positive confrontation, where the investigator just comes right out and says, the evidence shows you did this. From that moment on, it's a methodical process of breaking down defenses, shutting down denials, and guiding the suspect toward one single destination, a confession. And this right here really shows you the psychological heart of the technique. During a step they call theme development, the interrogator starts spinning these stories that minimize how bad the crime was. They might say, hey, maybe the victim had it coming, or anyone in your shoes would have done the same thing. The goal isn't to create a legal defense, it's to make confessing feel like the easiest way out. And all of this builds to a crucial moment, the alternative question. This is a masterclass in setting a psychological trap. The suspect is offered 2 ways the crime could have happened. But notice, did you plan it or was it spontaneous? Either way you answer, you're admitting you did it. The suspect is basically cornered into picking the option that sounds less evil, which is still, of course, a confession. As you can imagine, a method this powerful is, incredibly controversial. And that brings us right to the great debate. Is this an effective tool for justice or just a coercive tactic? This really lays out the 2 sides of the coin. On the pro side, you have people saying, hey, it works, it has a proven track record, it solves crimes, it brings closure to victims. But on the con side, critics are pointing to that huge risk of false confessions, especially with kids or people with intellectual disabilities. They also say it relies on really questionable tells to judge guilt, which leads to this guilt presumptive approach, meaning the interviewer goes in assuming the person did it, and their only job is to get them to admit it. The creators of the technique, for their part, are very firm in their defense. Their argument is pretty simple. When the technique is used correctly, without threats, without marathon interrogation sessions, it doesn't cause false confessions. They say the problem isn't the method, it's the interrogators who misuse the system. But many in the legal world could not disagree more. A Canadian judge put it in these really stark terms, calling the technique inherently manipulative. For critics, that's the fatal flaw, the whole foundation of assuming guilt from the very start. And here's the real kicker. One of the very first cases that made John Reid famous was built on a false confession. Darryl Parker confessed to murdering his wife during an interrogation with Reid himself. He was convicted, sent away for life, and was only proven innocent years later. That case is still the ultimate cautionary tale. Okay, so with all of these serious concerns, it's really no surprise that law enforcement agencies are starting to look for a better way, to move beyond this obsession with getting a confession. So what does the future of interrogation actually look like? Well, a leading alternative is called the peace model. It was developed over in the UK, and notice the language difference right away. It's called investigative interviewing, not interrogation. The entire goal shifts. Instead of trying to secure a confession, the goal is to just gather accurate information. The idea is that this is way more reliable because you might uncover new leads instead of just trying to prove a theory you already have. This slide really clarifies the massive difference in philosophy. You've got the Reid Technique, which is all about confrontation, persuasion, and assuming guilt. And then you have the peace model, which is about conversation, rapport, and staying neutral. With Reid, the job is to persuade. With peace, the job is just to listen and gather facts. And this isn't just some academic theory, okay? This is a real shift that's happening now. Major police forces like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Canada are officially moving away from these Reid-style tactics. One trainer had a great way of putting it. He said the shift is like going from Kojak to Dr. Phil, from high pressure and deception to a real conversation. And all of this leaves us with one last really critical question to think about. Look, the Reid Technique has, without a doubt, solved crimes. But if its intense psychological pressure can convict an innocent person right alongside a guilty one, is it a reliable path to justice? Or is it just a dangerous shortcut? In our search for the truth, what's the right price to pay for a confession?